I just went through my personal hell. The HOA boss left her SUV blocking my entire driveway and basically dared me to handle it. Her reason? She claimed my driveway counted as shared community space. She had no clue I'd involved the law and her scheme would crumble right there on video. I'll take it from the top. Before we get into it, drop a line about where you're tuning in from right now. I'm Holt Travis and I run a farm. It's not a massive operation these days. Just the right amount of acreage to keep me occupied and my thoughts straight. Enough for a couple dozen cows, a cornfield that shines like treasure in the fall, and a barn full of straw and old stories. My folks have tended this ground for 4 generations. My great-grandfather turned it over with a plow pulled by mules. I handle it with a John Deere rig as big as a cottage. That machine roars. Me? I'm mostly the silent type. I live by a straightforward rule. Put in the effort. Deal with folks honestly, and avoid stirring up issues. But when issues come calling at your gate, you meet them head on. You meet them with what you've got. Could be a solid grip. Could be a 12-ton hunk of U.S.-made iron. On that specific Tuesday dawn, the issue didn't bother knocking. It just pulled up and sealed off my driveway entirely. It was a large white high-end SUV, the sort that's never touched dirt. It sparkled under the sunrise like a polished tooth. Tucked beneath the wiper blade was a creased sheet of paper. My wife Lisa spotted it first through the kitchen pane. She's my rock, my organizer, my world. She manages the finances, the plans, the calls. She spots trouble brewing way before I sense the downpour. "Holt," she called, her tone steady but strained like a stretched cable. "You've got to check this out." I stepped onto the porch, cleaning oil from my palms with a worn cloth. The breeze was crisp, carrying scents of wet soil and mowed lawn. That white SUV marred the view like a blemish. I strolled down the pebble path, my boots grinding against the stones. The message was scrawled in bold, forceful handwriting on overly posh stationery. It read, "We must talk about the new shared entryway. I'll return at midday. Stay put." Signed, Karen Tyson, HOA head. I scanned it again. Shared entryway. That was code for an easement. A route for the upcoming housing development behind my place. A convenience for them. A scar across my prime grazing land for me. We'd received notices. We'd tossed them aside. I balled up the paper in my hand. Stay put. The nerve of it sank into me like an icy weight. I had feed to haul from town. The livestock wouldn't pause for Karen Tyson's schedule. I eyed the SUV. I eyed my barn. Inside waited my tractor, that faithful green beast. It wasn't merely equipment. It was an answer. A massive, hefty, mighty answer. I pivoted and headed for the barn. Lisa stood on the porch, clutching a mug. She recognizes my expression. She deciphers me like an open page. She didn't warn, don't. She simply sipped her brew deliberately and asked, "The camera by the bird feeder is on, isn't it?" I gave a nod. I tried her doorbell. No response. I phoned for a tow. "Show matter. We can't intervene," the operator replied. I stood in the driveway and shouted at her house. "Shift your vehicle, Karen." Drapes fluttered. Neighbor Ed emerged, cup in hand. Mark from a couple houses over sidled up to my barrier, still as a post. "You planning to haul it or ram it?" he inquired. "Neither," I answered. "I'm removing the garbage courteously." Lisa checked the birdhouse camera and grinned. "It's recording," she noted. "And so are you." The tractor's motor sputtered awake with a profound guttural roar that dislodged dust from the beams. It's a noise of raw strength, a vow of tasks ahead. I reversed it into the open, the enormous wheels carving deep grooves in the yielding earth. I guided it straight to the nose of Karen Tyson's spotless SUV. Her bumper reached about midway up my front wheel. It seemed like a plaything. I dropped the loader's pallet arms gradually, precisely. I've hoisted 3-ton bales of hay, yanked out oak roots, shifted rocks as large as compact vehicles. A 2-ton SUV was simply about leverage. I aligned the arms under the chassis, right past the front axles. I took care. I aimed to avoid marring the finish. Not at this point. Just relocate it. Mark rested against the rail and flashed a 2-finger gesture. Half an inch, gentle, I eased the control. Arms met the frame. Mark mentioned a chock. I maintained dual grips on the handles. The SUV exhaled from the opposite side, a murmur. He wouldn't dare. Another. "I'll wager 5 he does." Lisa advised evenly as ever. "Easy, Holt. Easy's my speed," I replied. The front lifted. The road fell quiet. Shutters flipped. The tractor snarled. With a soft tug on the hydraulic control, the SUV's nose rose smoothly, wordlessly, save for the faint creak of steel. The rear tires stayed on the pebbles, but the front hovered a solid 4 feet up. It appeared absurd, like a pup pleading. I shifted into drive and began moving. Not quick, just a deliberate, even pace toward the runoff channel beside the pavement. The channel dropped about 5 feet, packed with high weeds and last season's reeds. It was slimy down there, very slimy. I maneuvered the tractor to the verge, angled it precisely, and eased the arms down. The SUV sank with a gentle hiss of rubber into the foliage, then a soggy thud as the undercarriage hit the slope. Then I tapped the control once more, lightly. The SUV glided the remainder in. It tumbled and dipped front first. Call it a rural-style tumble. It ended up perched, nose buried in muck, tail end jutting at an odd slant. It resembled a hog sniffing for roots. I backed the tractor off, lifted the arms, and returned it to the barn. I shut it down, and the abrupt quiet was a relief. I headed back to the house. Lisa waited on the porch, device in hand, a faint grin on her face. "Neighbor Ed just passed," she mentioned. He slowed, reversed, then peeled out, chuckling so fiercely I figured his pickup might rattle loose. She raised her phone. The birdhouse nabbed a perfect view, sharp as crystal. I pulled the wrinkled note from my pocket and flattened it on the rail. "Stay put," I recited. I glanced at the SUV, mired and powerless in the channel. An issue handled, or that's what I believed. I assumed she'd catch the hint. I assumed incorrectly. This wasn't the close of a hassle. It was the launch of a battle, and I'd just unleashed the opening blast with a 12-ton weapon. The true mess, I was soon to discover, wasn't lodged in the ditch. It was only ramping up. The footage spread online before Karen Tyson's recovery crew showed. Neighbor Ed, good soul, had a dash cam. He forwarded the snippet to his kid, who uploaded it titled Farmer vs. HOA Chief. It exploded. By dinner time, the video was everywhere. Me guiding her fancy SUV in deliberate, measured increments into the channel. The feedback leaned heavily my way. "That's no ordinary tractor, that's a precision tool for dispensing fairness," someone commented. Another noted, "He didn't nick it at all." Smooth hoist, smoother payback. Lisa recited them while prepping the meal, giggling. For a bit, it seemed like a triumph. We'd resisted a tyrant, and folks online applauded. But I've lived long enough to realize a tyrant, particularly a wealthy and influential one, doesn't slink off after a humiliation. They go silent. They get systematic. Then they strike back. The online praise from unknowns dwindles, but the foe remains close by. The initial formal notice came 2 days on. Delivered certified, a hefty ivory envelope that seemed weighty and carried a whiff of costly scent. It bore the Briarwood Estates Homeowners Association seal, penned by Karen Tyson personally. Lisa slid it open neatly. Her actions exact. She perused it, and her grin vanished. "Well," she stated, tone level. "Here it comes." The document was a gem of minor despotism. It listed penalties. First, $500 for improper use of farm equipment on a neighborhood pathway. My driveway, standing for a century, was now labeled a neighborhood pathway. Second penalty, $1,000 for unauthorized alteration of shared scenery. That covered the wheel marks her SUV made sliding into the channel. The third was the stinger, $2,000 for generating a communal disturbance and risk, referencing the viral clip as proof of my hostile and erratic conduct. I gawked at the sheet. It was ridiculous, like being fined by the predator for chipping its fangs on your flock. "She can't mean this," I muttered. Lisa was at her laptop, fetching the HOA rules and regulations. She's the investigator, the tactician. I'm the brawn. She's the brains. We make a solid pair. "Oh, she means it, Holt," Lisa replied, digits racing over the keys. "The rules are phrased so loosely she can twist them however she likes. See this part. The Design Oversight Group holds the power to impose fees for any deed seen as harmful to the visual balance of the area." That's an open ticket for her whims. The visual balance of the area. My farm, predating Briarwood Estates by years before it was even sketched on a builder's plan, now threatened their balance. The following day, another notice showed. This wasn't a penalty. It was an official order. That afternoon, she marched along my pebble path like she claimed every rock. "Approve the survey access, Holt," she demanded, tone sugary with decay. "Or the county will approve it instead." I gripped the paper between fingers. You dispensing legal advice unlicensed now? She grinned slimly. I dispense victories. Types like you buckle, she added. I just choose the fold. Lisa appeared on the porch, phone raised. Karen cocked her head at the lens. Record this, she taunted. This is the moment he discovers who controls Briarwood. The cattle, I retorted, they control Briarwood. Her grin fractured in a huff. You'll regret not selling low. Lisa's lens captured it. It declared that given my shown aggression and the obvious requirement for backup entry for urgent responders, the HOA would request the county to inspect my property and pursue a service easement, throwing terms like common benefit and suggesting forced acquisition if I resisted. The county would rule on that. Not Karen, not the HOA. But the intent was clear. We're claiming your land, like it or not. This was her ultimate play. The driveway blockade, the penalties, all a setup, a means to fabricate grounds for the easement she'd craved from the start. She was crafting a record to portray me as an obstinate issue needing resolution. And the fix conveniently involved a path through my field that would line her and her builder pals' pockets. The messages began that evening. From Karen's formal HOA account. The initial was patronizing. Mr. Travis, I'm prepared to rise above. If you consent to a discussion on the easement, I could rethink these regrettable but essential penalties. I ignored it. 60 minutes later, another. Your silence is documented. A helpful demeanor would serve you well. Then they turned vicious. She charged me with devaluing homes. She warned of lawsuits that would entangle your farm in proceedings for ages. She even included a fuzzy shot of my barn. Title, What a Charming Vintage Structure. Pity if it flunked a safety check. She copied her insurance and implied her wrecked ride required total swap. It was outright menace. Lisa outputted each message and filed them in an expanding dossier tagged Karen. I'm a tolerant guy. I can bide time for a crop to sprout. I can endure a tempest. My tolerance runs profound, but it has limits. Karen Tyson was steadily, unyieldingly prodding me. She wasn't merely after a slice of my turf now. She aimed to crush me, to drown me in documents and warnings until I surrendered. I lingered on my porch that night, gazing at the shadowed acres my kin had invested their toil and essence in. The terrain was serene, calm, but conflict had been waged against it, against us. The penalties, the court threats, the bullying, it was merely the initial barrage. I sensed with a bone-deep surety that she wouldn't halt at notes and messages. Her type of venom always expands. The superficial wounds were just the start. The genuine hurt was approaching. The first true strike hit unexpectedly in the dead of a starless night. I stirred around 3 a.m. with an instinct that all wasn't right. No noise roused me. It was an absence. The usual soft drone of the large diesel reservoir's pump, programmed to refill the primary tractor, had stopped. It ought to have been active. I slipped into boots and a coat and snatched the sturdy maglite by the entrance. The outdoor air was chilly and thick with moisture. As I turned the barn's edge, my light beam revealed it. The line from the primary holding tank lay discarded on the soil, a shadowy, damp patch expanding in the earth nearby. The lock on the tank's valve was missing, clipped away with cutters. I inspected the meter. The reservoir, capacity 500 gallons of fuel, was almost dry. They hadn't siphoned a bit. They'd emptied it. A chilled wrath, unlike the fiery ire from the SUV episode, surged through me. This exceeded annoyance. This was a straight hit on my way of life. That diesel cost a fortune. But beyond that, it fueled the farm's heart. Without it, the tractor stayed idle, the land unturned, and the chores unfinished. This wasn't trivial bother now. This was vandalism. I scanned the light over the dirt, hunting clues, and spotted one. Beside the inky spill of leaked fuel sat a distinct boot mark in the mushy mud. It was a labor boot, an inexpensive make with a unique star design on the sole. Not my fit. I snapped a photo with my device. Proof. Lisa was awake when I returned indoors, concern etching her features. I didn't need words. She noted my stern expression. I displayed the image. They sapped the primary reservoir, I explained. Her palm covered her lips. Holt, we need to contact the sheriff. I shook my head. And report what? Fuel theft? They'll file it, and that'll be the end. No evidence ties it to her. Come morning, the damage's scope emerged fully. As I approached to release the cattle into the rear 40 acres, I saw the barrier. It wasn't ajar. It was severed. 3 precise slices through the thick mesh right by the post. The barrier dangled from a single joint, and the herd had vanished. A surge of alarm, icy and keen, struck me. My group wasn't vast, but they were my charge. Now they roamed free, lost in the early gloom, maybe on the primary route. The following pair of hours blurred into chaos. I rang neighbor Ed, his spouse Sharon, and a few reliable locals. It was a tight-knit group of growers bordering the upscale neighborhood, and we watched each other's backs. We fanned out in our vehicles, cruising the nearby lanes, beams cutting through the meadows. We located them, luckily. Some munched calmly in a neighbor's crop patch. Half a dozen had strayed toward the interstate, and we corralled them back as dawn commuters began flowing. It was a horror. Rounding them all and guiding them through the ruined barrier consumed the whole morning. By the time the final cow was secured in the enclosure and I'd mended the fence with extra cable, the sun blazed overhead. I was drained, caked in grime and fueled solely by raw energy and fury. This was a calculated act of cruelty. They could have just left the gate open. Cutting the fence was meant to cause maximum damage, to endanger my animals, to create chaos. It was Karen's message loud and clear. I can touch you. I can hurt you. I can destroy what you care about. I stood there looking at the patched fence, the tired cattle, the empty fuel tank, the fines I could fight, the emails I could ignore. But this was different. This was a line. You don't mess with a man's family and you don't mess with his animals. They had crossed that line. Back at the house, Lisa had been busy. She documented everything. Photos of the broken lock, the cut fence, the boot print. She'd estimated the cost of the stolen fuel and the time lost. She was building a case brick by brick. She's trying to create a pattern, Lisa said, her voice steely. She wants it to look like you're a negligent farmer, that your property is a hazard. First the dangerous tractor, now loose cattle. It all feeds her narrative for the easement. I sank into a chair at the kitchen table, the anger draining out of me, leaving behind a hard, cold resolve. I had been reacting. The tractor in the ditch was a reaction. Now that was over. The time for reacting was done. It was time to start planning. It was time to set a trap. She wants a war, Lisa, I said, my voice low. Fine, she's got one, but we're going to fight it on our terms, on our turf. My mind was already turning, thinking about cameras and traps and the kind of quiet, patient warfare that a farmer knows best. She had woken the sleeping dog. Now she was going to have to deal with the bite. The kitchen table became our war room. Lisa spread out a satellite map of our property, the kind you get from the county assessor's office. We had 160 acres, a perfect square. Our house and barns were near the road, but the land stretched back a long way. It was too much to patrol, too much to watch all at once. We can't be everywhere, I said, tracing the property line with my finger. So we have to be smart. We have to make them come to us, to a place we control. Lisa nodded, tapping a pen on the map. The fuel tanks, the main gate, those are the two places they've hit. They're predictable. They'll come back to do more of the same, to reinforce the pattern. She was right. Bullies are rarely creative. They stick to what works. My job was to make sure that this time what worked for them would work for me. The next day, I drove into town, but I didn't go to the feed store. I went to a specialty electronics shop and a hunting supply store. My shopping list was unusual for a farmer. 4 high-definition cameras, the kind that are motion-activated and have night vision. 2 tiny GPS trackers small enough to hide on a tractor. And the centerpiece of my plan, a special invisible ultraviolet dye meant for detecting leaks in machinery. It was harmless, but under a black light it glowed a brilliant, unmistakable blue. It was used to find thieves. I also bought 3 pre-built birdhouses. They looked ordinary, rustic, the kind you'd see on any farm. But I spent that afternoon in my workshop carefully modifying them. I drilled a tiny hole in the front of each one, just below the main opening, and mounted a small wireless camera inside. They had their own battery packs and would stream video directly to an app on Lisa's phone. They were my secret eyes. I spent the next 2 days setting my traps. It was hard work, but it was satisfying. It felt good to be doing something, to be taking control. I placed one birdhouse camera on a pole overlooking the main driveway and the front gate. Another went on the side of the barn with a perfect view of the fuel tanks. The last one I put on an old oak tree at the edge of the back pasture, aimed at the section of fence they had cut. The game cameras I placed in less obvious spots, hidden in bushes, covering the other approaches to the barn. Then came the GPS trackers. It tucked one deep into the engine compartment of my main tractor and the other underneath the frame of my flatbed trailer. If they tried to steal my equipment, I'd know exactly where it went. The final piece of the trap was the dye. I didn't put it in the main diesel tank that was still mostly empty. Instead, I used the smaller 55-gallon drum we used for the utility gator. I filled it with fresh diesel and then I added the entire bottle of UV dye. I mixed it in thoroughly. Then I left the cap slightly loose and put a brand new cheap padlock on the valve, one that could be snapped with a small pair of bolt cutters. It was bait. A nice full tank of fuel seemingly less protected than the main one. It was an invitation. I felt a twinge of something, a nagging question in the back of my mind. How far is too far? I was actively luring someone into a trap. But then I thought of my cattle wandering on a dark highway and the twinge disappeared. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about protecting my home. With everything in place, all we could do was wait. The waiting was the hardest part. Every night we'd sit in the living room, the TV on low, but our real attention was on Lisa's tablet, which showed the live feeds from the 4 cameras. Every shadow that moved, every rustle of leaves in the wind made my heart jump. The first night, nothing. The second night, a deer wandered past the barn, triggering the motion sensor and giving us a minor heart attack. The third night it rained, a slow, steady drizzle that turned the whole world gray and quiet. It felt like nothing would ever happen. I was starting to think I'd overplayed my hand, that they had done their damage and moved on. Maybe the sabotage was a one-time thing. Lisa, ever the patient one, put a hand on my arm. They'll be back. Whole people like Karen don't give up that easily. She's just waiting for you to lower your guard. As usual, she was right. It was just after midnight on the 4th night when the little notification icon popped up on her tablet. A chime soft but sharp in the quiet house. It was from the camera on the barn, the one pointed at the fuel tanks. We both leaned in, our breath held tight. The night vision view was grainy, black and white, but the image was clear. A lone figure, dressed in dark clothes and a hoodie, was moving stealthily toward the smaller fuel drum. He was carrying a pair of bolt cutters and a long-coiled siphon hose. He paused, looked around, and then went to work on the cheap padlock. It snapped with a dull click. The rat had found the cheese. Now we just had to see if he was dumb enough to eat it. I didn't call the sheriff, not yet. This had to be handled my way. I grabbed the big 6-mag light, the one that feels like a police baton, and a small, powerful UV flashlight I bought with the dye. I slipped out the back door, moving silently through the wet grass. The drizzle had stopped, but the air was thick and heavy. I didn't turn on my lights. I knew the lay of my land by heart. I circled around the back of the barn, coming up behind him. He was completely focused on his task. Thesifon hose already in the drum, the other end feeding into a row of plastic gas cans in the back of a beat-up dark-cold pickup truck I didn't recognize. The sound of the gurgling diesel fuel was the only noise in the night. I was about 10 FT away when he finished filling the last can. He pulled the hose out of the drum and a little bit of fuel sloshed out, splashing onto his hands and the cuffs of his jacket. He didn't seem to notice. He started screwing the caps back on the cans, getting ready to leave. That's when I made my move. I stepped out from behind the barn and hit him with the main beam of the mag light. The sudden intense blast of light made him cry out and throw his hands up to shield his eyes. "Looking for something?" I asked, my voice low and calm. He was just a man, not a monster. He looked to be in his 40s, thin and wiry, with a nervous energy about him. He was wearing cheap work boots. I'd bet my farm the heel had a star pattern on it. I wasn't doing anything, he stammered, blinking in the bright light. "I'm just leaving." "You're leaving with about 30 gall of my fuel," I said, taking another step closer. He darted left, boots skidding in the slick. I cut him off. "Keys," I said, "truck keys." Now he tried to shoulder past me. I planted and he bounced. "You can't prove Jerry," I said, reading the name stitched on his jacket pocket. "I don't need to prove you're bad at this. I just need to prove who sent you." His eyes flicked toward the road like a dog glancing at a master who wasn't there. That told me more than any speech. That's my diesel, not a buffet. He started to back away, his eyes darting around, looking for an escape route. "You can't prove nothing," he spat, trying to sound tough, but his voice cracked. That's when I switched flashlights. I turned off the big mag light, plunging us back into near darkness for a second, and then I clicked on the small UV light. I pointed the beam at his hands. They lit up as if they were on fire, a brilliant, ghostly electric blue. The splashes on his jacket cuffs glowed. The tip of the siphon hose glowed. The puddle on the ground glowed. He looked down at his own hands, his mouth falling open in disbelief. He was caught, literally blue-handed. I call it Smurf justice. For a second, he froze. Then panic took over. He spun around and tried to run, but he was panicked and the ground was slick with mud and spilled diesel. He slipped, scrambled to his feet, and I was on him. I'm not a young man, but I'm strong. Years of farm work have made sure of that. I didn't hit him. I just grabbed him by the front of his jacket, spun him around, and pinned him against the side of the barn. He struggled for armament, then went limp, breathing hard. The fight was gone. He was just a scared man who'd been caught doing something stupid. It wasn't my idea. He gasped, his eyes wide with fear. I swear it wasn't my idea. She paid me to do it, she made me do it. He was talking fast, the words tumbling out. He was ready to sell out whoever sent him for the slightest chance of getting out of this. I had him. I had my proof. But his desperate confession was more than just an admission of guilt. It was the key. It was the first thread I could pull that I knew would lead all the way back to Karen Tyson and unravel her entire scheme. I didn't let him go. I walked him into the barn, sat him down on an old wooden crate, and stood in front of him, my arms crossed. The big barn doors were closed. It was just the two of us, surrounded by the smell of hay and old wood. The man who told me his name was Jerry wouldn't look me in the eye. He just stared at his glowing blue hands. Lisa came in a moment later. She didn't say a word to him. She just set a small digital voice recorder on a nearby workbench and pressed the record button. A tiny red light blinked on. Jerry's eyes flicked toward it, and he seemed to shrink even smaller. "Let's start from the beginning, Jerry," I said, my voice even. "Who is she?" He hesitated for a second. Then it all came pouring out. He was a local handyman struggling to make ends meet. Karen Tyson had hired him a few weeks ago for some work at her house. Then she'd offered him cash for another job, an off-the-books job. He admitted to everything. He told us how Karen had given him a pair of bolt cutters and paid him $500 to drain my fuel tank the first time. He said she was the one who told him to cut the fence to make it look like my cattle got out on their own. She wanted to create a record of problems to build a case against me with the county. "She said you were a stubborn old man who was blocking progress," Jerry mumbled. "She said, if we made life hard enough for you, you'd sell the easement for cheap just to make it all stop." He described her plan in detail. She wanted the access road for a new luxury housing development. The developer was a company called Oakage Estates, and they were paying her a hefty consulting fee to secure the right-of-way. The HOA was just her weapon, the fines and violations, her ammunition. Lisa listened intently, taking notes. When he was done talking, she spoke for the first time, her voice crisp and clear. "Jerry, you're in a lot of trouble. Grand theft, felony vandalism, trespassing. You could go to jail for this," Jerry flinched. But Lisa continued, "We're not unreasonable people. We don't want to ruin your life. We want the person who put you up to this." She slid a piece of paper and a pen across the workbench. "I've written out a statement with everything you just told us. I want you to read it, and if it's true, I want you to sign it. You do that, and we'll tell the sheriff you cooperated fully. You don't. And I'm calling him right now and sending him the video of you stealing my husband's fuel." It was a simple choice. Take the fall alone or take Karen down with him. I took his keys, rolled his beat-up truck into the equipment bay, and chained the bay door. "Evidence," I said. He left on foot. After Jerry left, walking quickly down the dark road with a warning to never come near my property again. Lisa and I went back to the house. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by a sense of grim purpose. We had the confession, we had the video, but we knew it wasn't enough. A signed statement from a caught thief against a respected community leader like Karen Tyson. It would be his word against hers, and she would tear him apart in court. "We need more," Lisa said, already back at her computer. "We need a paper trail. We need to connect Karen directly to this developer, Oak Ridge Estates." And so the hunt began. Lisa, with her methodical brilliance, started digging. She spent hours online searching county records, business filings, and property deeds. I made coffee and looked over her shoulder, amazed at how she could navigate the maze of digital bureaucracy. The first crack appeared around 2 a.m. Lisa was cross-referencing the HOA's publicly posted meeting minutes with her own records. "That's funny," she murmured. "The HOA website says they held a special board meeting 3 weeks ago. The minutes show they voted to authorize legal action to secure an easement on our property. I remembered that night clearly. There was no meeting. I said, "Neighbor Ed is on the board. He would have told us Lisa's fingers flew across the keyboard." "Exactly." Ed said the last meeting was 2 months ago. She pulled up the document. The minutes were detailed, formal, and completely fake. Karen had falsified official records to give herself the authority to sue us. The real breakthrough, the piece that tied it all together, came just before dawn. Lisa had been digging into the shell company, Oakage Estates. It was registered in another state designed to be anonymous. But she found one loose thread. A filing document for the company listed a registered agent, the person legally responsible for receiving paperwork. The name on the form was not Karen Tyson. It was a name I didn't recognize. Karen Miller. "Miller?" I asked, rubbing my tired eyes. Lisa looked at me, a grim smile on her face. "I wondered about that too," she said. She opened a new browser tab and typed Karen Tyson genealogy into the search bar. A few clicks later, she found it. A wedding announcement from a local newspaper 20 years ago. The bride's name was Karen Miller. It was her maiden name. She had used her maiden name to register the shell company that was paying her to force an easement through our land. She was the developer. The whole thing was a self-serving criminal enterprise. We had her. We had the confession, the videos, the fake minutes, and now the money trail. The trap had been sprung, and the queen rat had left her name all over the cheese. We thought we had a few days to plan our next move, to take our evidence to the sheriff. We were wrong. Karen must have realized her handyman, Jerry, had gone silent. She must have suspected he'd been caught. Because her next move wasn't petty, it was desperate. The storm hit the following night. A real Midwestern monster rolled in with biblical fury. Wind howled, windows rattled, rain fell in sheets. The power flickered once, twice, then went out completely, plunging the house into darkness. Lisa lit a few oil lamps, their soft glow casting long dancing shadows on the walls. It was in the middle of a deafening clap of thunder that Lisa's phone, which she'd been keeping charged with a battery pack, chimed. It was another motion alert. This one was from the camera on the oak tree overlooking the far end of the property. We huddled around the small screen. The night vision was struggling against the sheeting rain, but the image was undeniable. A beat-up, dark-colored pickup truck, the same one Jerry had used, was at our main gate. But this time 2 men got out. They weren't trying to be quiet. One of them had a heavy chain and was wrapping it around the gate. The other was getting back in the truck. They were going to ram it or pull it right off its hinges. These weren't vandals sent to cause a nuisance. This was a brute force assault. They're here to yank Jerry's truck and smash the cameras. Destroy the evidence before we can hand it over. They're here to get it out of the barn before we can give it to the cops. Lisa was already dialing 911. "The lines are down," she said, her voice strained. The storm must have knocked out the tower. We were on our own. A cold dread mixed with white-hot anger filled my chest. This was my home. My family was here. I would not let them break in. "Stay here. Lock the doors. If they get past me, hit the panic horn and stay in the pantry," I told Lisa. I grabbed the heaviest flashlight and Mikey's and went out the back door into the roaring storm. The rain was so heavy it was like walking through a waterfall. I wasn't going for my pickup. I was going for the one thing on this farm bigger and tougher than their truck. I was going for Old Green. The tractor started with a reassuring roar, its engine a beastly growl against the thunder. Its headlights cut through the darkness and the rain. 2 powerful beams of light. I didn't bother with the front gate. I knew my own land. I drove straight through the side fence, the wires screaming and snapping as the massive machine plowed through without even slowing down. I rumbled out onto the main driveway just as they got the gate open. Lightning ripped the sky open. For a split second, I saw their faces wide, mean, scared. The chain snapped off the hinge and whipped the hood of their truck. They floored it. I swung left and the rear tire slid if they doubled back. I yelled toward the house. No answer. Lines were dead. Wind was a scream. From the porch, Lisa flashed the handheld light twice. "I see you. I'm here." The truck fishtailed at the equipment shed and clipped my harrow, sparks skittering like fireflies. I dropped the bucket and herded them off the hard pack toward the pond, inch by wet inch. They saw me then. The tractor. A massive roaring monster coming out of the darkness and the storm. Its lights blinding them. They panicked. The driver slammed their truck into reverse. Tires spinning in the mud, and the man on foot scrambled to get back in. They weren't here for a fight with a 12-ton machine. They tried to turn around in the narrow space between the barn and the equipment shed, but the ground was a sea of mud. Their tires found no purchase. I just kept coming slow and steady like death itself. I didn't have to hit them. I just had to herd them. Truth is, I'd rather mend a fence than a man. I knew exactly where I was pushing them. Toward the east side of the property, where the ground sloped down sharply toward the big irrigation pond. The driver, in his terror, made a fatal mistake. He gunned the engine, trying to swing the truck's rear end around. The truck fishtailed wildly in the slick mud. For a moment, it looked like he might get control, but then the back wheels slid off the edge of the graded path. The truck tilted, hung there for a heart-topping second, and then slid slowly at first, then all at once down the muddy embankment and into the pond. It came to rest with a great splash, its nose buried deep in the murky water and its tail sticking up in the air, its headlights creating two ghostly, wavering columns of light beneath the surface. The storm raged on. I stopped the tractor at the edge of the pond and shone my lights on the half-submerged truck. The two men were scrambling out of the passenger side window, soaked and sputtering. They were big guys, much bigger than Jerry, but the fight was completely out of them. They looked terrified. I just sat there in the tractor's cab, high above them, watching. The rain started to lessen, the thunder moving off into the distance. I got out of the tractor and walked to the edge of the water. One of the men was clinging to the side of the truck bed. The other was wading through the waist-deep water toward the bank. As he got closer, I saw something float out of the cab and bob on the surface. Two small, dark rectangles, burner phones. I waded into the cold water without a second thought and snatched them up before they could sink. I held them up. The two goons just stared at me, their faces pale in the tractor's headlights. They knew what I had. More evidence, more proof. The storm was ending, and so was Karen Tyson's desperate plan. I had her thugs. I had their phones. And I had their truck slowly drowning in my pond. The sheriff finally arrived an hour later after the storm had passed, and the phone lines were back up. He looked at the scene, the two soaked and shivering men sitting on the ground in handcuffs, the pickup truck sticking out of the pond, and me standing there covered in mud, and just shook his head. "Halt!" Sheriff Miller said, his voice weary. I should have known that when dispatch said there was a minor traffic incident at your place, it would look like this. I handed him the two burner phones sealed in a plastic bag. I gave him Jerry's signed confession and a thumb drive with all the video files. Lisa had already printed out the fake HOA minutes and the corporate filings for Oakage Estates, all neatly organized in a binder. We gave him everything. I handed over Jerry's keys and the chain we'd used on the bay door. He took our statements and said, "For now, this is our report. Whether it's criminal mischief or lawful removal depends on your proof," he added. "Don't move that truck or the phones on your own. Chain it. We'll process it." He spent a long time looking through it all, his expression growing grimmer with each page. He looked at the confession, then at the two men in the back of his patrol car. "These two aren't talking," he said, "but I have a feeling these phones will." The next 2 days were quiet, the calm before the final storm. The sheriff's department impounded the pickup from the pond and took our evidence. Lisa and I knew we had done all we could. Now it was a matter of waiting for the legal system to work, but we also knew we had one more card to play. The HOA had a regularly scheduled monthly meeting that Friday night. It was usually a dull affair attended by a handful of retirees complaining about lawn ornaments. But we knew Karen would be there. She would have to be to maintain the illusion that everything was normal. We decided this was where it had to end, not in a quiet courtroom months from now, but in public in front of the very people she had lorded her power over. We spent the day making calls, talking to our neighbors. We spoke to neighbor Ed and his wife Sharon. We talked to the woman Karen had fined for planting the wrong color of petunias. We talked to the family she'd threatened over the height of their kid's swing set. We didn't tell them everything, just that we had something important to say at the meeting and that we would appreciate their support. Friday night, the community clubhouse was packed. Word had gotten out. People were standing along the walls. Karen Tyson was at the front of the room looking polished and confident, but I could see a faint tension around her eyes. She clearly wasn't expecting this kind of turnout. She tried to run the meeting as usual, talking about budgets and landscaping contracts, but the air in the room was thick with anticipation. Finally, she got to the new business portion of the agenda. "Does anyone have any new business?" she asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I stood up. "I do," I said. Every head in the room turned toward me. Karen's smile tightened. "Mr. Travis, I'm surprised to see you here. I would think you'd be busy dealing with your various property issues." A few of her cronies on the board chuckled. "I'm here to talk about property issues, Karen," I said, walking toward the front of the room. "Specifically, my property and the easement you've been trying to force through it." Lisa was right behind me. She took out her phone, propped it up on the podium, and pressed a button. "For the record," she said in a clear, loud voice, "this meeting is now being live-reamed." A murmur went through the crowd. Karen's face went pale. She leaned toward a mic she thought was off and hissed, "Delete that feed." The chat exploded. "We heard that. Comments board, play the blue hands. Run the minutes. That's against the rules," she sputtered. Neighbor Ed stood up from his seat on the board. "Actually, Karen, it's not," he said calmly. "I checked the bylaws. There's nothing prohibiting it. I laid it all out. I started with the blocked driveway and the fake fines. Then I told them about the stolen fuel and the cut fence. I played the video from the birdhouse camera on the projector we brought, showing Jerry with his glowing blue hands. The room was silent, captivated. I read Jerry's signed confession out loud, his words echoing in the stunned silence. I explained how Karen had falsified the HOA minutes to authorize a lawsuit against us. Then Lisa put the final slide up on the screen. It was the corporate filing for Oak Ridge Estates, the developer, and next to it, the wedding announcement from the old newspaper, both bearing the name Karen Miller. "The developer who stands to make millions from this easement," I said, my voice ringing with clarity, "is a shell company owned and operated by one person, your HOA president, Karen Tyson." The room erupted. People were shouting, pointing at Karen, who looked like a cornered animal. She tried to deny it, to shout over the noise, calling it all lies and slander. But then other people started to stand up. The woman with the petunias spoke, her voice trembling with anger about how Karen had harassed her for months. The man with the swing sets stood up and described how Karen had threatened to put a lien on his house. One by one, a dozen people who had been bullied and intimidated by her found their voice. It was a tidal wave of anger, and Karen was drowning in it. She saw it was over. Her power, built on fear and deception, was evaporating before her very eyes. As the chaos reached its peak, just as she was trying to gather her things and flee the podium, the main doors of the clubhouse swung open with a loud bang. The whole room went silent. Standing in the doorway, his face set like granite, was Sheriff Miller. Sheriff Miller wasn't alone. He had 2 deputies with him. They didn't rush in. They just stood there for a moment, letting the silence in the room deepen. Every eye was on them, then on Karen. You could hear the AC hum. My chest felt like a gate strained by wind. She was frozen behind the podium, her face a mask of disbelief and panic. The sheriff took a slow walk to the front of the room, his boots making a heavy, deliberate sound on the tile floor. He held up a thick sheath of papers. "Karen Tyson," he said, his voice calm but carrying to every corner of the room. "I have a warrant for your arrest." A collective gasp went through the crowd. He continued, listing the charges as if reading a grocery list. Conspiracy to commit grand theft, felony vandalism, insurance fraud related to the vehicle you reported damaged in a ditch, and racketeering for using the Briarwood Homeowners Association as a criminal enterprise to defraud its members and enrich yourself. It was that last charge, racketeering, that seemed to finally break her. The blood drained from her face. This wasn't about fines and easements anymore. This was serious prison time. She didn't scream or cry. She did what cowards always do when they are truly cornered. She ran. She shoved past one of her board members, knocking over a pitcher of water, and bolted for the side exit. The deputies moved to intercept her, but she was fast, fueled by pure panic. She burst out into the parking lot. We all rushed to the windows to watch. Her big white SUV, the same one freshly repaired and gleaming under the parking lot lights, was right by the door. She fumbled with her keys, finally got the door open, and threw herself inside. The engine roared to life. She slammed the SUV into reverse, peeling out of the parking spot with a squeal of tires, and then threw it into drive. She was aiming for the main exit for the freedom of the open road. But she was panicked, not thinking clearly. A deputy had moved his patrol car to partially block the exit. Karen swerved violently to avoid it. too violently. Her front tires went off the pavement and onto the manicured, well-watered grass of the clubhouse lawn. The grass was wet, slick as ice. The big SUV lost all traction. It began to slide, a slow, inevitable, almost comical skid. It slid across the lawn, gaining a little speed as it went down the slight incline, heading directly for the road and for the drainage ditch that ran alongside it. Perfect, poetic, inescapable. With a final heavy crunch of metal and plastic, the front end of Karen Tyson's luxury SUV plunged for the second and final time into the exact same ditch I had so gently placed it in weeks before. It came to rest at the exact same angle, nose down in the mud, tail up in the air. The engine sputtered and died. Silence. Then the parking lot was filled with flashing red and blue lights. The deputies didn't have to chase her. They just calmly walked over to the driver's side door, opened it, and helped a dazed and muddy Karen Tyson out of the car and into a pair of handcuffs. The reign of the HOA queen was officially over. She'd quite literally driven herself right back into the hole she had dug. In the weeks that followed, the whole rotten scaffold Karen built came apart, board by board. Jerry folded first. He met the prosecutor, hands scrubbed raw like he could wash off the blue. He took a plea and told the truth. The two pond divers caved next. Turns out cold water and burner phones don't make good alibis. Those phones were gold. Texts, schedules, payment screenshots. Karen's consulting looked a lot like paying herself with her maiden name and an extra zero. Her lawyer tried the usual tricks. Delay, deny, scowl. The stack of proof kept growing. Birdhouse cams, fake minutes, the shell company trail, even her own emails where she CC'd insurance and hinted her SUV was likely a full loss. When the DA added racketeering, the room went quiet. That word changes air. Her counsel leaned close, spoke low, and a proud face finally cracked. She pled, not out of grace, out of math. The board she ruled like a tiny kingdom gone in a week. Resignations came in a sad little flood. Neighbor Ed, steady as a fence post, took interim president and called an emergency meeting in the clubhouse. People filled every chair and then the aisles. He read the agenda, cleared his throat, and said the line we all needed. Motion to void every fine issued under the prior board for the last 2 years. The chorus of I hit the ceiling. Folks cried. Folks hugged. I just let my shoulders drop and breathed like a man who'd been holding a hay bale above his head for months. The easement died where it stood. Oak Ridge Estates, poof, dissolved in the plea. The outside developer, who had sniffed at my pasture, backed away like a stray dog that finally met a boot. The right-of-way stayed what it had always been. Cattle path, deer track, my land. Nothing fancy, just mine. Life slid back into its groove. Feed, fences, sleep. Evenings with Lisa on the porch, counting bats and blessings. The corn went green, then gold, then gone. Trucked out with that sweet dust that coats your teeth and makes you think of next year. Winter put a soft hat on the fields. The quiet came back deeper than before, like the ground itself exhaled. One cold afternoon, I cleaned the barn, sorting bolts by coffee can and stories by weight. A box from the clubhouse sat by the door, full of paper ghosts, old agendas, a crooked trophy for best yard, some pens that never wrote. At the bottom was a bent plate caked in dried ditch. Miss HOA. I laughed out loud. I washed the mud but left the bend. The bend was the truth. I set it on the bench and asked myself the question that kept prowling the edges of my mind. How far is too far? Is it baiting a thief with dye? Chasing a truck with a tractor? Live streaming a lie until it can't breathe? I turned the plate in my hands and saw the answer in the ripples. It's too far when you start the fight. When you covet what isn't yours, when you swing first and call it order. I didn't start this. I finished it. Lisa came in cheeks pink from the air. You keeping that? She asked. Oh yeah, I said. I took a hammer and one fat nail and walked to the big center beam. The barn wood is older than me, and most of my mistakes. I drove the nail home and hung the plate at eye level where the morning light can find it. It fit there like a knot in the grain. We stood a while. The wind fussed at the door. Somewhere a calf bawled and a hen bragged about nothing. Lisa slid her hand into mine. What's it say to you? She asked. I smiled. It says we don't start trouble here. I looked toward the drive, clean and quiet. Around here, if you block a driveway, you meet a ditch. I squeezed her hand. And if you try to take what's ours, you meet us. I shut off the lights. The plate shone a little in the last of the sun, a small, crooked moon on old wood. We latched the door. The barn held our tools, our stories, and one loud reminder. On this farm, we mind our business until someone decides to make their business ours. Then we mind it with wits, with proof, and if we must, with 12 tons of green steel.